Sure, this is my scan, and it is my 7-week scan. It is the only evidence that I have that my pregnancy ever existed. And I am not alone in this, and I count myself actually lucky. Last year, on my 31st birthday, on the 22nd of March, I found out that I was pregnant. And whenever any woman finds out that she's pregnant and she looks at that positive test, you naturally map out a life for that child. You map out their future, their hopes, their dreams, their names, all of that kind of stuff. And I was very naive in terms of pregnancy or what that entailed because it was my first time. I had gone to the GP, I had done my checkups, everything was great. At 7 weeks, I began to bleed, and I didn't know what was normal or what wasn't. So I went back to my GP, and I was told that it just happens sometimes to some women. And if a miscarriage was to happen, there was nothing I could do about that anyways. Now for me, in my very first pregnancy, I didn't even fathom to think that miscarriage could happen. I didn't even enter my stratosphere. So I went to the A&E in CUMH, where I would spend about 5 hours waiting to get a scan. It was an ultrasound, and CUMH, the maternity ward, has women who are pregnant, who are at different stages of pregnancy, and obviously the emergency unit has women that are worrying. They're waiting for scans, and I'm sitting in that environment. I went for my scan, and I had my scan, and they told me that they couldn't see anything. They couldn't actually see any baby or any fluid or any sac or nothing. So I was sent home, and I was told that I would have to go back to the early pregnancy unit in Cork that following day. Now, when I was sent back home, you can imagine the worry that I had, because I was told that they couldn't see anything, so therefore I thought I was now losing the baby. There was nothing visible. I was distressed. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent my whole night crying because I thought this was the worst case scenario. I went back to CUMH and the early pregnancy unit the following morning. I went into the clinic, and I was sitting amongst women who are also getting different scans. They may have bad news, they may have good news, we don't know. I remember sitting across a woman who was crying her eyes out. She was sitting there by herself. There was nobody there with her, and I just thought that this could be me next after I go in for that scan. So I went in for the scan, and they did an internal scan, and I was shown the heartbeat for the first time. And everything felt amazing. Any, I suppose, woman that would have had children would know that first scan and that first feeling of, oh my God, this is real, this is happening. So I was told that, there's nothing to worry about, you can go home. And so I did. And naturally, as you're progressing through the pregnancy, people tell you not to tell anybody, because the 12-week mark is the safe mark, and that's when nothing can go wrong. After you get to the 12 weeks, you're safe. You're in the safe zone. So I told my closest family, my friends, obviously, and it's not unconceivable to become excited and to want to, buy little gifts or whatever as you're going through this. But I had booked my scan on the Tuesday, which was my 12-week scan. And on the Sunday, before my 12-week scan, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I had cramps before I went to sleep, and when I woke up that morning, I just knew something was wrong, and I put back my sheets and I was covered in blood. I was alone, and so I sat into my car and I drove myself to CUH by myself. It was the most torturous drive of my life, because I knew deep down what was happening, but I begged and pleaded with anybody just to hear me, just to make sure that this wasn't happening. So I went back into CUMH, and I sat in the little waiting area, and there were mothers coming out with babies, and I'm bleeding, and I had to go into the bathroom to show them that I was actually miscarrying. They had to see that evidence, which wasn't the most humane thing that I had to do. I had my scan, and I was told it doesn't look like the baby has progressed beyond the 7-week mark. It isn't where it should be. So I went back to home and had to go back into CUMH the next day to get an internal scan to confirm this. That drive home was the worst drive I've ever had. I don't think I've ever had an experience like it, because I had to drive myself back home by myself. I parked up my car, and I had to call my fiancé and my mother to tell them what was going on, that I was miscarrying. The following morning, I went back into CUMH, and I got the confirmation. They did the internal scan. You are now miscarrying. So I was given my options. You can either have the D&C, which can be very invasive. It can cause tears. you can take medical intervention or you can just let it pass naturally. So I chose the option of medical intervention. But I wasn't told anything about what was going to happen when I did that or how it would affect me physically. I was told it was only going to be like a bad period. So I went home and I took my medical intervention, and I had to call CVH because I wasn't sure if what I was experiencing was normal. Nobody told me that I would have enough amniotic fluid that when the medical intervention would work, my waters would break. Or how when I would be sitting on the toilet, I'd pass the pregnancy and I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be distraught, I'd be crying, panicking, sitting there, and all I could do was flush. I would have to go back and I would be told that I have to do it again because there is still residue left. And after that progress, and after all of that, I then had to go back one last time and was told that actually the best time for you to try is right now because you're the most fertile after the first miscarriage in the first 3 months. As a woman who's gone through something like that, the last thing you're thinking of is getting pregnant again. And it was horrifying because I didn't understand what would happen to me emotionally afterwards, how I would be so envious and how I wouldn't want to leave the house, how everything would be a trigger, how I thought I'd go crazy, how I thought I was going crazy. I felt so isolated and so alone in this process. And it wasn't until I spoke to other women that they said, I have had a miscarriage too, but I've actually never told anybody. And so this happens an awful lot, more than we actually understand or more than we actually have statistics for. And women have been suffering alone for a long time. So this bill is rooted in lived experience, driven by evidence that's shaped by compassion, and that's the big thing here. And it begins with a simple, powerful truth here that every loss matters, no matter what loss it is. As we debate this bill today, this week, fresh validation from across the Irish Sea, on the 6th of July 2025, the UK government announced that parents who suffer miscarriages before 24 weeks will now be entitled to at least 1 week bereavement leave, with full legal rights for both mothers and partners, enriched in upcoming employment reforms. This follows earlier recommendations by 2 UK MPs for 2 weeks of paid leave for miscarriage losses, a change that underscored the physical and emotional toll of early pregnancy loss. The shift reflects evolving understanding that pre-24 weeks in the UK, but it's actually pre-23 weeks here in Ireland, that it's not medical, it's not a clinical event, it's actually very traumatic and deserving of protection. And this bill echoes it for 23 weeks. It looks at paid leave, 5 for women and 2.5 days for their partner, a voluntary and confidential pregnancy loss register, and that's incredibly important. The state does not recognise losses under 23 weeks. You're supposed to just carry on and pretend like nothing happened. And legal protections as well. Now, pregnancy loss is one of the most common forms of bereavement and yet one of the least recognised in both society and law. 1 in 4 women, and that's a statistic that's just, it's not a true statistic because it doesn't take into account women who miscarry at home, who've had miscarriages and all other kinds of cases. But 1 in 4 women in Ireland will experience that. But behind the number are thousands of stories of grief, of silence, of people returning to work with empty arms and aching hearts because the law makes no space for their pain at all. These proposals are not radical, Minister, they are rooted in the best practice internationally. In England and Scotland, parents can receive a formal baby loss certificate for losses before 24 weeks. In New Zealand, paid leave after miscarriage is already in place, and in Australia, workers are entitled to leave following pregnancy loss. In the north of Ireland, our Sinn Féin colleagues have pushed for a cross-party momentum towards a baby loss certificate scheme, giving families recognition that they deserve. We believe the state should afford no less here. This bill is built on the findings of groundbreaking Irish research, including the Places Project and recurrent evaluation led by UCC's Pregnancy Loss Research Group. The Places Project highlights the profound impact of pregnancy loss on working lives. Women and partners spoke about the absence of paid leave, the lack of information, and the emotional distress returning to work too soon, often in silence and often unsupported. One of the key recommendations is clear: an introduction of medically certified paid statutory leave for pre-viability pregnancy loss. This bill delivers exactly that. The Recurrent Project evaluated services from people experiencing recurrent pregnancy loss and found serious gaps. Only half of maternity units in the country offer specialised clinics for recurrent miscarriage. Psychologist supports are limited and non-existent, and too often the care provided lacks the sensitivity and consistency that this loss demands. This isn't a nice-to-have, Minister. This bill has been informed by countless conversations with advocacy groups like Féileacán, the Miscarriage Association, with clinicians and researchers, and with a lot of grieving families, where countless women have been met with coldness when they try again, where some have to beg for investigations, where one woman who delivered at 22 weeks old was told we only do funerals for real people, and where another woman who had the ashes of her 22-week-old baby and wanted to take it on a flight was told you cannot go on with these ashes because you don't have a death certificate. This is the kind of stuff that people are suffering with and women are suffering with today. So I want to be clear that to my colleagues and everyone that will contribute onto this bill that this is not party political. It's not a party political matter. And I hope that this House can support this bill. We can improve it, we can make progress in these chambers and shape public awareness together. But to delay this bill is to traumatise even more women. Because every parent deserves recognition, every loss deserves dignity, and every person navigating grief deserves time, space and care, and all of our support.
Senator McCormick, 4 minutes or two.
I'd like to welcome the work that Nicole and my party Sinn Féin have done on this issue, and I want to thank Nicole for sharing her personal and powerful story. It is a story that sadly 1 in 4 women who experience a miscarriage can relate very well to. There are around 15,000 miscarriages a year in Ireland, yet even though we know that this loss can have a profound emotional impact, not only on a woman, but also on her partner, friends and family, there is little recognition of the grief and pain that is suffered. We know that there are lots of physical symptoms of grief, such as fatigue, tiredness, loss of appetite, difficulties concentrating, and sleeping problems. Then there's the emotional symptoms, feelings of loneliness, guilt, shock, and numbness, anger, an overwhelming sense of sadness, and sometimes depression. We must never undermine the traumatic experience of a miscarriage and how difficult it can be to talk about it to others, and the pressure of having to behave normally and go back to work as if nothing happened. It is really sad that we don't already have statutory workplace supports in place for this, but it feels like yet another example of women's health issues that have been ignored for too long, and another thing that women have to just put up with. That just can't continue. As Senator Ryan has outlined, this bill before us aims to provide statutory paid leave for individuals suffering from pregnancy loss. It also gives statutory paid leave for partners, which is very important. The bill ensures dignity, privacy and empathy in the workplace with confidential notification procedures and protection from employment discrimination. Another key piece of this bill is the symbolic recognition that would be provided by a voluntary pregnancy loss register. Initiatives have been introduced in many places similar to a voluntary pregnancy loss register, like Senator Ryan has outlined. England launched a baby loss certificate scheme in 2024. Scotland introduced a memorial book and certificate in 2023 for losses before 24 weeks. Wales are also looking into the scheme. Other jurisdictions like Germany and Australia are providing early pregnancy loss certificates. In the north, my Sinn Féin colleagues have brought forward the Death, Stillbirths and Baby Loss Bill, which is progressing in the Assembly. So there's plenty of precedent, and there is no reason why we shouldn't have this register here. The provision of paid leave for women who experience pregnancy loss, including pregnancies under 24 weeks, is also something that is already established in other countries. And with this bill, we would be bringing Ireland into line with those progressive international practices. Losing a baby during any stage of pregnancy is heartbreaking. Acknowledging that can be hugely important for families and sends a clear message to parents that their love and grief is real and they're not alone. I hope that the Minister can support the passage of this bill through the Seanad and we get cross-party support so families who go through pregnancy loss can get the supports and acknowledgement they need.
Oireachtas Shannon, and I'd like to welcome Minister Burke here to the Senate. I now call on Senator Crowe, and I believe you're moving Amendment 1. Senator Crowe.
I move.
Great. Thank you. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Leska Hirlock, and to welcome Minister Burke to the Chamber. Just first of all, I want to thank Senator Ryan for sharing her personal story, and certainly it's a very heartfelt story. I just wish you all the best. Fianna Fáil welcomes the debate and supports the proposal for the Minister for Enterprise, Tourism and Employment through a timed amendment of 12 months from the 9th of July 2025 for the private members' bill to allow sufficient time for the development of government legislative proposals in line with the principles of this private members' bill. I am advised that the Organisation of Working Time Act is not the correct legislative vehicle to provide for the type of entitlements set out in the private members' bill. Such entitlements are more appropriately covered by family leave provisions such as those in the Parental Leave Acts from 1998 to 2019, which include provision for forced leave. As members will be aware, the Equality and Family Leaves Miscellaneous Provisions Bill is listed for priority drafting in the Government Legislation Programme, and consideration could be given to including amendments to provide for statutory leave for pregnancy loss. This is an issue that affects thousands of families right across the country every year, and the nature of the topic means that it often doesn't attract the focus or attention an issue that has been such widespread impact would usually. Because it is so rarely spoken about, it can feel to parents or families it affects that it is rare or unusual, when in fact the exact opposite is the case, and it's sadly very common. According to the Miscarriage Association of Ireland, 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. Often when this happens, very few people are aware, so in addition to the parents mourning this huge loss, it can be very isolating for them too, because the vast majority of people in their lives likely know nothing about this massive loss they have just suffered. It can cause a whole range of issues for families and people generally that I think need to be discussed, and much more often. And while it's obviously a challenging topic, it is one where support could really have a transformative impact. As members will be aware, the Places report, Pregnancy Loss Under 24 Weeks in Workplaces, informing policymakers on the support mechanisms, was commissioned by the then Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, and was carried out by University College Cork and our own University College of Galway. The report was published on the 26th of January 2024 and makes a series of recommendations regarding support for employees who have experienced a miscarriage. These recommendations, which include the provision of statutory leave for miscarriage, are now being considered in the development of government policy in this area, including any legislative implications. Members will also be aware that the UK is currently examining this issue and has flagged an intention to introduce paid bereavement leave for miscarriage as well as unpaid statutory bereavement leave in some instances as part of the forthcoming Employment Rights Bill. I understand this is being closely monitored by department officials. The introduction of any additional form of compassionate or family leave will require detailed legislative provisions on the circumstances in which the leave entitlement would arise and may give rise to consequential amendment to the existing legislation. Development of legislation of this nature will require significant collaboration across a number of government departments. I am advised that the relevant departments will, working collaboratively, undertake to progress these matters over the coming months and will consider the development of the appropriate government legislative proposals in line with the principles of this private members' bill. So to conclude, while I am certainly supportive of the aims of this bill generally, neither I or Fianna Fáil can support it in its current format, but I will be expecting we would see progress in this area in the short term, in the immediate term. It is, of course, understandable that an area such as this will require cross-departmental work on the legislation, But I hope and expect we will see the fruits of that labour in the short term. Following that work, I look forward to seeing legislation before this House which will hopefully address the topic. Thank you, Laska Herlock.
Shandor Crowe. Shandor Nelson Murray.
Thank you. First of all, to Senator Ryan, a massive hug over to your way. You're very brave when you speak, so well done. That took a lot for you to do that. Really admire you. There is unique pain that comes from preparing a place in your heart for a child who never comes. David Platt. Thank you, Senator Ryan, for bringing this bill to us today. It has been a pleasure to discuss this with you over the last couple of weeks. As someone who has suffered miscarriages myself, including my eldest daughter's twin, I know what that ache is like for thousands of women across Ireland. Pregnancy loss, including miscarriage and stillbirth, is often not openly discussed due to a combination of factors: societal discomfort, lack of language to express grief, fear of saying the wrong thing, and the belief that sharing the news will somehow lessen the pain. Many individuals and couples grieve in private, feeling isolated and unsupported. And on that, I think of your journey, that time, driving to the hospital, come back from the hospital, and just feeling so alone. Unfortunately, you often always hear comments that are not supportive of loss, or they're unhelpful or hurtful comments, like in your case as well, and in my case, on my numerous miscarriages. At least it was early, or you can try again, or in your case, you're highly fertile now. These type of judgments only add to the fear of discussing the loss that you have experienced. It is frequently the case that a pregnancy loss is treated as something that is silently endured. You grieve through it quietly, and then you return to work as if nothing has happened. But Minister, miscarriage is a real loss of a baby, but also of a future and a dream. Miscarriage is surprisingly common, with not just 1 in 4 women experiencing it, it's 1 in 4 pregnancies ending in loss. Think of the amount of women in Ireland who have had to endure this loss. I also acknowledge that the grieving process is different for everyone and affects people in different ways. There is no right way to grieve or to heal. For some, stepping away from work and stepping away from daily responsibilities helps them to grieve, and you and I chatted about that, and to try and regain a sense of control. But for me, it was different for me. Work provided a structure for me. It was something that I had to get back into to occupy my mind, because I'd go mad if I had to think about it all the time. So for me, I went straight back into work. Everyone is different in this, so everybody needs to be accommodated for. It isn't about forgetting the pain. It is living alongside the pain. As an employer, I would consider it my responsibility to support all our employees, both professionally and personally. We must recognise that life doesn't stop at the door of the building when an employee walks in, and our policies in this case should reflect empathy and a commitment to well-being, especially during one of life's most painful moments. And I would hope that even without this potential bill, that many employers would actively engage with their employees who are suffering this, but we know a lot of them can't talk to their employers about it. I'm also acutely aware of the costs also that come with running a business. We are currently faced with an increase in insurance premiums, sick day pays, minimum wage increases and auto-enrolment, to name but a few. However, even with these challenges, humanity should prevail. I really feel it should. Nobody should have to go through such a traumatic experience and be expected to keep up appearances in work. In this case, a couple of sick days or an expectation to just bounce back is not enough. But back to this bill. The bill proposes to amend the Organisation of Working Time Act to introduce a statutory entitlement of 5 days of paid leave to an employee who experiences pregnancy loss and 2.5 days paid to an employee who is a parent to a pregnancy loss. It also proposes to extend the protections under the Unfair Dismissals Act and provides for the establishment of a confidential opt-in register of pregnancy loss under the civil registration, something I'd personally like to see myself, registration of babies. The Organisation of Working Time Act is not the appropriate legislative vehicle to provide for the new proposed entitlements, as it is not designed to be the initiator of new policies, nor to set out terms and conditions for compassionate leave. Rather, it implements the Working Time Directive by setting out an employee's maximum working hours and associated entitlements to minimum rest periods and annual leave. An amendment to the existing family leave provisions or a discrete piece of standalone legislation providing for bereavement leave in limited circumstances would form a more suitable legal basis for pregnancy loss related leave. It is important, Minister, though, to keep in mind that anyone hoping to have a baby, they've made a plan from the moment, as you said, you see that pregnancy test. the moment that pregnancy was known, it's really important to give them time to recover. So I'd like to thank Senator Ryan. I know you're doing the right thing, and I've no doubt we will get legislation, and we will get it right. But it's really important that we do look at all of this in its entirety. And I do respect the government's call. I'm waiting for time to do that. But thank you for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Shandor Kyogan.
Thank you. Ask Herlock and Nicole, thank you very much for sharing your personal story. And I think there's a lot of women in this chamber that could share their stories too, but your story today, this is about you, it's about your story today. And I want to thank you for bringing this legislation that marks a significant and compassionate step forward in how we as a society and as a legislature recognise the reality of pregnancy loss. The bill acknowledges something that many families have known for far too long, that the loss of a pregnancy, whether at 6 weeks or 16, is not just a medical event. It is a bereavement. It is a moment of grief, of heartache, heartbreak, and of profound emotional impact. And it is the times our law reflected the truth. Under this legislation, employees who experience pregnancy loss will be entitled to paid leave, 5 working days for the person who was pregnant and 2.5 days for their partner or co-parent. This is a humane and necessary reform. It gives people the space to grieve, to recover and to be acknowledged for this loss. This bill also provides for the creation of a confidential opt-in registry of pregnancy loss. This is a powerful and symbolic measure. It allows parents to formally record the existence of a child whom may never have been legally recognised. For many, this will be a source of healing and dignity. I commend the sponsors of the bill for their thoughtful and compassionate work. It is a bill that speaks to the emotional reality of pregnancy loss, and it brings our legal framework closer to the lived experience of so many families. But while I support the bill wholeheartedly, I must also say it doesn't go far enough. This legislation recognises the loss of a child in early pregnancy as something worthy of leave, of recognition and of respect. But it also, perhaps unintentionally, draws attention to a deeper inconsistency in our laws, ones that we can no longer ignore. Let me remind the House of the Women's Aid 2024 annual report, which revealed that 188 pregnant or postpartum women were supported last year due to intimate partner abuse. These are not just statistics. These are women whose lives and the lives of their unborn children were placed in danger. I've spoken out before about a young woman from Dublin, 22 weeks pregnant, who was stabbed to death by her partner. The court heard he intended to kill her unborn child, but no charges were brought for that death. I've spoken of the 27-year-old mother in Donaghadee, 34 weeks pregnant, murdered in her home. 2 lives lost, but only 1 victim recognised in law. These cases are tragic, but they also expose a legislative vacuum, because while this bill recognises the emotional loss of the pregnancy, our criminal law does not yet recognise the legal loss of an unborn child when the loss is caused by violence. Now, I'm fully aware that this bill is focused on the employment law and civil registration. It amends the Organisation of Working Time Act and related legislation. It does not and cannot create new criminal offences. But I believe it is entirely appropriate in the context of this debate to highlight the moral logic that underpins this bill, that the loss of pregnancy is a loss of life, a loss of hope and a loss of potential. And if we accept that logic in the civil sphere, we must also begin to ask, why does our criminal law not reflect the same truth? If a pregnancy ends in violence due to a violent assault and the unborn child dies, that death is not counted. There is no separate offence, no additional charge, no justice for the child. This is not about abortion. This is not about interfering with reproductive rights. Reproductive rights is about intentional violence. This is about criminal accountability. This is about ensuring that when a child dies in the womb or
What's the point
as
of
a result
reference to this?
of a crime.
Sorry, Senator Kyogan.
So what's
The point of reference to this bill? This
Yeah,
bill is
I know. So I
specifically-
support the bill, and so I'd urge the House to consider what we must do next. We need a broader conversation, one that includes the criminal justice system, the rights of the victim, and the recognition of the unborn life in cases of violence. Thank you.
Margaret Shandor. Senator Stevenson and Cosgrove, and I understand your sharing time, three and three?
Three. If that's agreed.
Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
I wish to thank the Sinn Féin senators, and particularly Senator Ryan, for bringing forward this piece of legislation, and I want to speak in full support of it. And just obviously to note as well, I think it's important the bravery that Senator Ryan has, quite frankly, consistently showed when she's been bringing forward amendments and legislation, but particularly today, in sharing her story, because it's not easy, and I know it won't be easy for any other senator in this room who may be doing the same. This is a bill that recognises the very deep emotional, physical and psychological impact of pregnancy loss and the trauma that goes alongside that. And for too long, this form of grief has been completely unseen in our society. It's been unspoken in our workplaces, in our legislation, and it's too often even completely absent from our social discourse. And yet, as we've already heard, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss, a figure which is probably highly underestimated, and it's affecting women across every part and every province of this country. And behind every one of those losses is a woman and her partner who may be suffering in silence, expected to return to work as though nothing has happened. And I would like to particularly commend this bill for including partners and recognising the particularly difficult role that they also face when affected by pregnancy loss, which is often an additional stigma that men face when even having to express these things. And from a feminist perspective, this bill is a really powerful acknowledgement that reproductive labour and reproductive grief are very real things, that women's bodies and experiences must no longer be ignored in our labour laws. It's very much a rejection of the old structures that women are expected to endure quietly, and it's a step towards laws that respect the complexity and the cost of female embodiment. I believe this policy should reflect empathy, fairness and the lived realities of people. And this bill aligns with those values by providing paid leave following pregnancy loss and ensuring that workers aren't forced to pick between their annual leave, financial security, and that they're actually given time to properly grieve and heal. I really support that this bill also has an opt-in for the confidential register so that babies can be officially recognised should parents wish, because this gives dignity to life, no matter how short. And it's about ensuring that our records, our laws and our public life within those spaces, pregnancy loss isn't invisible. It's often said that you can tell a lot by society and how it treats people in their most vulnerable moments, and I believe this bill is very much a litmus test for that, for our compassion and maturity as a legislator, and for how seriously we take reproductive health and care. I've got to say I am deeply disappointed that there's a timed amendment put on this bill. I don't think it reflects any urgency or any sincerity. Senator Ryan has said this isn't really this isn't a party political issue. This is a women's rights issue, actually. And I know that this has cross-party support from women across this chamber, and indeed men as well. So it's really disappointing. I think it is not a good sign of things to come if a bill which has so much benefit for women across the society as a timed amendment on it. And I'm very disappointed, and I'm concerned if this is the way that things will come in the next 4 years. Camilla Margaret.
Shandor Cosgrove.
And also I want to commend Senator Ryan for bringing this bill forward, and for Senator Murray. I too suffered early miscarriage loss, and I suppose like what Senator Ryan said, every loss matters, and no matter what the pregnancy loss is, and no matter what stage of your loss is, it will have a physical, it will have an emotional, it will have a psychological trauma on you. And under the current system, women losing a child at under 23 weeks often find themselves, like we said, having to return to work. Many people still experiencing very physical symptoms such as bleeding and cramps, which only add to the emotional and psychological suffering experienced. This then leads to employees having to take sick leave, annual leave, or alternatively asking employers for discretionary compassionate leave, which then ensures that secrecy and often shame then is added onto it. And again, I was told, you're grand, get on with it, it was an early pregnancy loss, you're fine. And myself, I suppose when you do have early pregnancy loss, you actually do think that yourself, I should be getting on with it and I should be able to go back into work. So women are struggling often when women are trying to cope with reality. They should be supported. Women should not have to decide whether they should have to take sick leave and pretend they're sick because they're not sick. They shouldn't decide have to take annual leave, but they are actually grieving, and they should be able to have time and support to be able to grieve. And they shouldn't have to make impossible choices surrounding how they acknowledge their feelings of grief. Grief does not follow the same pattern or the same timetable for all people, and this needs to be reflected in the legislation. Some people may be able to return to work shorter after loss, others might need to take much longer. The INTO have, as a trade union made up largely of women, been instrumental in bringing issues to the national attention, and the Labour Party reproductive bill, which bears many similarities to this current bill, was constructed largely on information and data provided by the Places Workforce report. And I just want to commend actually Senator Ryan too for organising a briefing with the UCC Pregnancy Loss Research Group, where Professor Keelan O'Donoghue and Dr. Marita Hennessy, who had made it very clear the evidence about what we need to see in this. And I think the Organisation of Working Time Act is the perfect place for this amendment to be actually in. And the reproductive bill that my Labour Party colleague Marie Sherlock has brought forward is actually passed through second stage within the Dáil and is going to committee now for further scrutiny. So I think that's the perfect place where it should be. So the introduction of and maintenance of a voluntary register, which we've spoken about here, for the registration of lost pregnancies at any stage of its gestation is a very significant and welcome development in the recognition of that loss and of each lost child's unique identity. Pregnancy loss is a matter so personal, so internally painful to women or to a family unit, and each experience is so unique that it has suited society maybe to treat it as a private event. While this may work for some women and families, it doesn't work for others who feel that their loss is unacknowledged in a way that no other form of bereavement would be unacknowledged. So I fully support this bill. I would agree with Senator Stevens here that there should be no time delay on this, and I would urge that this will be looked at and that the place for it is within the Organisation of Working Time Act. Thank you.
Shandor Higgins.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, as I say, join with others in commending, I think, a very good bill, a very necessary bill, as has been said, but also a very good bill, like a very well-drafted bill, and something that has real nuance in how it is approaching the issues, real sensitivity, that goes through the kinds of policy points highlighted for groups and academics such as the Place, and section by section, line by line, addresses every concern. And that's why I know it seems maybe cold to go to the quality of the legislation, but I think that that's really important because it shouldn't be delayed. This is one of the really well-drafted bills that I've seen. It goes through, it looks at all of the things that matters. It looks at the question of duration by setting an incredibly modest baseline, but the scope for greater leave in terms of 5 days. It looks at the really importance, the vital importance of discretion, that people are able to seek this leave without it, that they are given that proper privacy in terms of when they wish to seek it from their police. It looked really crucially at the protection of employment rights, because not every employer is compassionate, sadly. I mean, many are. So that the protection of employment rights for persons in terms of this and creating that space, because it's not just that people want that space, but sometimes when people have to take that place, and especially in the way they are often having to take it now, where they simply cannot go to work at a certain period of time, they're having to seek and may or may not be granted sick leave or annual leave. They are in a position of vulnerability, and many employees and many pregnant women are in that position. And again, as I say, this is a really well-drafted bill, and frankly, when good legislation comes through, and it comes through from the opposition, the right thing to do is to let it progress. It doesn't become law as soon as it leaves second stage and goes on to committee stage. It rather facilitates constructive debate, which then, yes, it may well be incorporated into government legislation, but that's what we've done in the past. We've done it with legislation from former Senator Batchik, my colleague Senator Ruan, in terms of her NDA bill. They did end up getting incorporated into government legislation down the line, but what happened was that you teased it out really well by engaging in good faith with the opposition with the proposal put forward by others. And I think we need to get back to that kind of constructive cooperation. I am worried about the direction of travel in this government, where everything is delayed, and it was maybe thank you for your idea, we'll think about it later, but we're going to stop you in the moment, and that sends a signal of pausing, an unnecessary signal of pausing and stopping those who are trying to progress these issues. Going to the substance of the bill, I think it is really crucial that this is properly addressed. The impact on people has been talked about, the physical impact, the emotional impact, and it's really important. I think it's need to be clear. This bill is centred on the pregnant woman and their partner. It's not around, and people experience it in different ways, and people experience the loss. For some people, it's the loss of a life. For other people, it's the loss of a pregnancy and the loss of a potential and a possibility and a way of thinking future. People experience it in different ways. That's why, again, a good nuance in this bill that the register is, for example, an opt-in register that people can approach in the way that's right for them. And I know people who've experienced it in different ways. So that there is that opt-in component, and that it centres the woman affected and their partner. It also is very good in that it recognises the question of kinship care and others where somebody else needs to step in where a parent may actually be lost. But it's really important when we look to this, those who are affected by this, it's not simply, if it comes at 9 weeks, if it comes at 12 weeks or 20 weeks. An extraordinary journey can be taken in those 9 weeks, first of all, or 10 weeks, or 12 weeks, or 20 weeks. But also, for many, it may be the end of, it may be not the end point, but it may be following a journey of years, following the journey of years for persons who've kind of undergone IVF, who've been taking a whole journey to try, and so for some people, this is really coming at a point of intense, long emotional journey that people have taken to get to that point of being pregnant and to move it forward. And the hormonal impact is an extraordinary thing even in itself, maybe from anything else. And it is cruel to suggest that people would have to step into work and cover it over. And we know that for years and years, like every time we read a novel in Ireland, or how many books have we read and stories when late on, after maybe years of suffering, maybe after knock-on effects in terms of other relationships and inter-family relationships and everything, that it's revealed that somebody had a miscarriage, and it becomes an underlying thing, rather than it being something that society is acknowledging is happening to women and needs to be supported, and they need to be supported through it, and that needs to be given the kind of deeply caring, deeply thoughtful legislative and policies and compassionate supports as set out in this bill. And that's why I really think we should be progressing the bill. I think that's the caring and correct thing to do. And if the government want to outflank it, because they have much faster ways of moving legislation, so be it. But the best way to show right now that they're taking the issue seriously is by letting it progress, letting us bring it to committee stage and further teasing out each individual section of this excellent legislation. I think that's the thing that sends a powerful signal to the women of Ireland. Thank you. And their families.
Just for the information of members, second stage debate relates to the general principles of the bill. The debate can relate to what is in the bill and what can legitimately be included in the bill. So just on a point of information. Shandor Niquillan.
Gurmagat lasca hirlach agus the fáilseo the ara tá mis fear breakle an shocking and over rehochtach seo flay. First of all, I want to join my colleagues in commending Senator Ryan for her work on this bill, but also just for the courage of conviction that she has taken in this matter and other deeply sensitive and personal issues. It is not an easy thing to do, to speak out publicly about something so private and past trauma and pain. And I just want to put on record my appreciation for the Senator's willingness to be a voice and an advocate for herself and in our communities as well. Minister, this is a very sensitive discussion. We've heard from colleagues, and we'll continue to hear from colleagues across the House about their own personal experiences of pregnancy and infant loss. Again, this openness is to be acknowledged. But I also believe that these stories just show how many people are affected by this kind of grief and tragedy in Ireland. The World Health Organization and other organisations would tell us that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, for example. But the very nature of a miscarriage before 12 weeks is that it is shrouded in secrecy. Many women lose babies in the privacy of their own home and pregnancies that they haven't even shared news of with their families. I know at least one woman in my life who's lost 2 pregnancies and not one other soul knows about that, which means healthcare facilities weren't informed, and so her losses do not form part of the 1 in 4 pregnancy statistic. How many deeply private individuals are there out there who've suffered multiple losses and have not reported those losses to anyone? So I firmly believe that the statistics we hear are incorrect. They are gathered, of course, and they are reported in good faith. But due to the nature of these losses, I do believe that the 1 in 4 figure we hear to be a misrepresentation. Today I want to speak on behalf of all the men and women who've suffered pregnancy and infant loss and who haven't been able to tell anybody, who haven't felt able to tell anybody. Those who've been in such a vulnerable place to begin with that the loss of a much wanted baby was too heavy a burden to even speak about. Sometimes to even acknowledge the loss by sharing that news with family or friends is to deepen the wound and to lengthen the time it takes to cope or to move on in as far as anybody can ever move on from the loss of an infant following a distressing miscarriage or tragic stillbirth. Now try and think of telling this to an employer. The World Health Organization published a paper recently, and I'll quote it: "Whatever the circumstances surrounding the loss of a baby, every single woman deserves respectful and dignified healthcare and acknowledgement for her loss, providing support for psychological issues she may face and empowering her to make future decisions about having a child." This is an important point to raise and discuss in relation to this bill. If you have suffered the loss of an infant, you're not sick, you're not on holidays, you're not on annual leave, but you are most certainly not fit to attend work. When I experienced pregnancy loss, I was admitted overnight due to complications, so I accessed time off. But sick leave or annual leave in these instances are wholly inappropriate. If you do get access to some kind of medical leave, how can you trust that an employer won't discriminate against you in the workplace when it comes to career opportunities and progression? And if you are negatively affected, how then can you be empowered, as the World Health Organization advises, to make further decisions about ever having a child? Assuming the appropriate legislative vehicle is identified, I support the premise of this bill to introduce 5 days of paid leave to an employee who experiences pregnancy loss and 2.5 days paid leave to an employee who is a parent to a pregnancy loss. I also support the establishment of a confidential opt-in register of pregnancy loss. The UK, as Senator Ryan has said this week, they've put on record their intention to introduce a statutory right to bereavement leave, including for miscarriage. It would be unacceptable for us here in Ireland to lag behind and to not follow suit there and look at what is being done in the area. I stress the right to privacy and compassion, even if it means forcing compassion from people or line managers or employees who don't exhibit it by nature. I'll end with a quote from the World Health Organization: "Pregnancy must be a positive experience for mothers and babies. When that isn't possible, women deserve our empathy, respect and support."
Minister, thank you for being here. I want to commend the Pregnancy Loss Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2025 and to commend Senator Ryan and all of my colleagues in Sinn Féin who co-sponsored this bill. I think it's very important, and as has been set out by our colleagues here, it's the least we can do in marking the loss of, the most extraordinary thing we can do as human beings is bring life into the world. And I have been privileged to sit with my colleagues on both sides of the House as part of the joint Oireachtas initiative started by Senator Ryan on pregnancy loss and loss of an infant. And my daughter, Leodin, would be 22 now, if she had lived. And I attended the births of all 5 of my children. And, in Leodin's case, it was a completely silent delivery. And there were aspects of that reminded me, Senator Ryan, of what you're, how you're describing, those moments when at 12 weeks or 14 weeks or 20 weeks, we're all on the same pathway. And, the sudden shock of that loss. And then, the grieving for the life that would have been. And my little girl, there were many nights I lay with my hand on her mum's tummy, just feeling those little kicks and just anticipating what the future might hold. And like whether it's a little blue line on a pregnancy test or, a heartbeat or an echo or a scan, is something that it's a pathway that so many of us walk. And that loss, taking my little girl to the Little Angels plot in Glasnevin Cemetery, and the hardest thing in the world to do was to put her in the ground and then to turn around and walk away, to leave all of your hopes and dreams there in the ground. And her mum's milk had come in for little lips that were no longer, you know, like her little eyes, and she was so, like, as your little one, all of our little lives to be formed and to be lost in that way. So the very least we can do is you know, not just allow this bill to passage, but to promote it and to speed it through. And I agree that the Working Time Act is the perfect place, and it is a very well drafted bill. And you know, in the context of everything that we've shared here, all of us, you know, at 23(1), paragraphs A and B, sections A and B, 5 working days, 2.5 working days. So our cabinet, with all of its collective skill, decided to amend this by 1 year. Now, this is a trend that is emerging, where members of this House, and this House is designed not to be a mirror of the lower house. It's supposed to challenge the lower house and complement it. And when we come in here and bring our lived experience and pour out our hearts and souls, to amend it then by a year in a system that you know very well, where a senator in the upper house, how many private members, how many PMB slots will they get in the lifetime of the government, if they're lucky? Maybe 3, maybe 4. So to amend this by a year is, I'm sorry to say, it's a negative act. And I really think we can do better than that. And if it is to be a trend where all initiatives that have cross-party support are dealt with in this manner by summary delay, it's a delay that's designed to kill the bill. And I think we have a better way of doing politics. There is nothing within that year that couldn't be achieved within the time frame it would take for this to progress naturally through this House. So to actually invest time and effort in drafting a rationale for this amendment, and I've seen it here, I saw it last week in relation to other legislation, it's dispiriting. I think we can be better than that. And I think fundamentally it sends a very strong signal to the women of Ireland. And it struck me, Senator Ryan, when you said that this is the greatest cause of loss and grief, miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and is the least acknowledged. And here we have an opportunity to make a very strong statement to the women of Ireland, to the people of Ireland. I think it's a lost opportunity to amend it in this way, but I commend Senator Ryan for your moral courage and for your leadership. And I think we should hold government to task on this time next year. Gormahagat.
Shandor, Tully and Collins, and I understand you're sharing time. 3 and 3?
Yes,
Is that agreed?
First of all, I want to say this: the pregnancy loss provision, miscellaneous provisions bill is a vitally important piece of legislation. It's been really well drafted, and I want to commend my colleague, Senator Nicole Ryan, for all her work on this bill, and also for sharing her personal story, and indeed the others in the chamber who have done so as well. That's not easy. I come from a family of 10, I'm actually the second youngest in a family of 10, and I was an adult before my mother actually admitted she had had a miscarriage, her 5th pregnancy. So she lost twins actually, and she talked about it then, and her and my father. So she had 2 more siblings, but that was the impact it had on her, like that she didn't discuss it after it happened. And I have 6 sisters, and 3 of them have had miscarriages. So to say 1 in 4, I think, is a huge underestimation of the numbers that are affected. I'd say it's at least 1 in 4, but it is probably a lot more. So it affects a huge proportion of the population. And as has been said here, so many are just expected to get up and get on with it and go back to work and pretend like nothing happened. Like, we've talked about the physical effects on the mother, but also the emotional and psychological effects on both parents are tremendous. And, people need support. And this legislation would go some way to providing that support and that understanding. I have a friend who recently, a few months back, found out she was pregnant. She was delighted about it, but at around 12 weeks, she realised something was wrong. She went to the hospital and it was confirmed she was miscarrying. And she was treated with compassion and kindness, but she was told she'd have to come back in to discuss with the consultant her options for going forward. When she went in, and it was a female consultant, she was treated in a clinical fashion and told, these are your 3 options. No warning, no proper support whatsoever. And she opted for, taking a pill at home 2 days apart, to end the pregnancy. She wasn't warned of what would happen. She took the first pill on the Friday evening, and she always immediately went into excruciating pain, where she was 8 hours on the floor breathing. She wasn't even fit to be moved by ambulance. Lucky enough, her partner was with her. Like, she should have been warned about the possible effects. There should have been some sort of pathway for him to get support. He was ringing the hospital. There was no support there whatsoever and no options. They're still traumatised by the whole effects of what happened. So we really do need to see legislation put in effect that supports people, gives them time off work, gives them time to grieve, and gives them support to get over the traumatic loss of a pregnancy. I think if you haven't been through it yourself, you don't sometimes realise what's involved. But I think this bill is so important, and I am too utterly dismayed by the government amendment to delay this bill. I don't really see a need for that. I think it's an important piece of legislation that we're all supporting here and should be allowed to pass. Thank you.
Shandor Collins.
Gaurav Mahagat. I stand here today in full support of the Sinn Féin Pregnancy Loss Miscellaneous Bill 2025, not just as a legislator, but as someone who has lived the reality that this bill seeks to recognise. And I commend my colleague, Senator Ryan, for the work that she's put into this and the thoughtfulness that is in this bill. Miscarriage is common, it's painful, and it is too often invisible. I know this because I went through it myself. But when I miscarried, I was in a job where I didn't have the option to leave my post. There was no system, no cover, no policy in place to say, you are experiencing loss, you can go, you will be supported. So I stayed, and I miscarried while I worked, because there was no other option. That is the silence this bill seeks to end. The silence in our workplaces, in our systems, and in our state. And there is another part of that silence that I want to speak to. The first time my miscarriage was ever formally acknowledged wasn't at the time it happened. It was when I became pregnant again with my son. In the maternity hospital, I was asked not how many children I had, but how many pregnancies I had. For the first time, it struck me. This wasn't my 3rd pregnancy, it was actually my 4th. And in that quiet question, how many pregnancies, I realised my loss was seen. It was known and it was counted. Not just by me or by my family, but by a system that understood that it did matter, because it does matter. This bill will give people the choice to have that acknowledgement through a certificate, through paid leave, through data that can finally tell the full story of miscarriage in this country. As my colleagues have said, 1 in every 4 experience miscarriage, which I truly believe as well, it is a lot more. If you're to count every woman in this chamber that has stood up so far, 99% of us have said we've gone through this. But we've never built a policy around that reality. This bill is about dignity, fairness and recognition. It's about making space in our systems for the kind of grief that doesn't get spoken out loud. So I support this bill, not just for myself, but for every person who has suffered in silence, who has gone back to work too soon, or who has never seen the loss recognised. This bill sees them, and I am proud to stand here and say that I do too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And next I call on Senator Laura Harman.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. And I suppose firstly I want to say that I fully support the Pregnancy Loss Bill 2025, and I want to commend Senator Nicole Ryan for bringing forward this extremely well thought out and researched and detailed, compassionate, caring, health focused bill to the House today, and to the Sinn Féin senators for bringing it forward. I suppose I just wanted to say firstly, have been struck, listening to the debate. I wasn't actually going to speak on it, but I think it's important to say that representation really matters in politics and diversity really matters in politics. And I think, we have more women now in the Seanad than we have ever had in the Seanad, and today I'm the 11th woman to speak in relation to this. I haven't had experience of pregnancy loss myself, but I've known people that have, certainly, and people in my own family included as well. This isn't just a women's issue, of course. We hear Senator Clonan so eloquently speaking of his personal experience of this. It affects people regardless of gender, and partners regardless of gender as well. But it does, it predominantly has affected women. And I suppose this House has a strong record of bringing forward issues in relation to pregnancy, be it in relation to contraception, reproductive rights. I mean, we saw Mary Robinson when she was a senator decades ago spearheading the campaign for contraception. We've seen the likes of Ivana Bacik in relation to abortion. So it's about a whole spectrum of issues. And it is truly extraordinary that we don't have legislation like this in place already. And we don't have it, I would argue, because there weren't people over the years, there wasn't enough diversity maybe in political representation to bring it forward. And this is part of a wider journey of opening the doors and opening the conversation in relation to pregnancy and pregnancy loss and the stigma, I suppose, that exists around it, and that it has been in the dark, for a very, very long time. So I think it's really welcome that we're having such an open discussion here today in relation to it. We can see how it affects so many senators in this room, regardless of their gender. So it is a really, really important bill. We know that 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in loss. And I think in terms of the bill itself, this is absolutely an issue that needs to be dealt with in terms of the Working Time Act, in terms of employment rights, the fact that it makes provision for leave from work is really, really important, and it needs to be recognised. It is a health issue in terms of physical health, emotional health, mental health, and that does need to be recognised. And I particularly welcome the fact that it has a provision to register the loss in a confidential manner, because this is about acknowledging people, acknowledging the grief that is experienced, the true loss that is experienced, and allowing people to have that recognition. This is crucially important. And I mean, 51% of the population in Ireland, are women, and as I say, 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in loss. And I just want to say as well, and I know other senators have mentioned this, but there is a trend from the government in terms of kicking the can down the road in relation to legislation that is coming from this House. And it seems to be a thing where there's a delaying tactic. I mean, how many pregnancies will end in loss in the space of 12 months? A full-term pregnancy is 9 months. How many pregnancies will end in loss in the course of 12 months that you propose to delay this? I would argue that it's been delayed long enough. Senator Ryan was able to draft this well-constructed, well-researched, caring, compassionate, health-led bill, and she's been a senator for less than 6 months, and you're saying you need a whole year to consider how it can be done. And I would say that is unacceptable. I think it is unacceptable, and I think that the government needs to step up to the mark, and they need to do this for women and their partners across the country.
Senator, and just before I call on the Minister, I want to welcome guests of Senator Fiona O'Loughlin in the gallery, a group of ladies from Kildare celebrating International Women's Day. You're all very welcome with us today, and you hear the main topic of what we're discussing, so you're very welcome. Minister, I'll call on yourself now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. I welcome the opportunity to discuss this private member's bill that addresses the extremely important and sensitive subject of pregnancy loss. Miscarriage can be a deeply personal loss and is something that is often dealt with privately by mothers and fathers who grieve the loss of joy, excitement and a precious future imagined. I know 1 in 5 or couples can experience pregnancy loss, and is something that has impacted all of us here, whether directly or through a friend or family. As many of you present for this debate sadly know, it can be an incredibly difficult reality to face, emotionally, physically, and mentally, and may require time to mourn the loss or even to begin to heal. Despite how unfortunately common pregnancy loss is, many people endure this grief in silence, especially in a work environment. While society has made some progress in acknowledging and discussing pregnancy loss, many still find it difficult to speak about it openly. As a result, individuals often navigate this experience without the support of family, friends, colleagues, or indeed their employer. I know for many here today, it has been very difficult and challenging to discuss, and I hope throughout the debate we are mindful of the spectrum of experiences that exist when it comes to miscarriage, pregnancy and parenthood. Employees should feel safe and supported in sharing their loss with their employer and in seeking the time they need to process their loss and to start to recover from it. At present, we have no provision for leave when it comes to the loss of a pregnancy prior to 24 weeks gestation. The Maternity Protection Acts 1994 to 2004 provide for an employee to be entitled to full maternity leave in the case of a stillbirth after 24 weeks gestation. The Paternity Leave Act 2016 also provides for paternity leave in this situation. The Sick Leave Act 2022 provides for a statutory sick pay scheme for all employees who are medically certified as unfit for work. From the 1st of January 2024, the entitlement to paid sick leave increased to 5 days. However, I want to acknowledge that those experiencing pregnancy loss may not require sick leave, but rather may need time away from work and other daily commitments to recover from what they have been through. Despite existing legislation in this space, I believe there is a need within our additional legislative framework to better care for working mothers and fathers to go through pregnancy loss. Employees should feel that a miscarriage is a loss which they can share with their employer, recognising that they have suffered a bereavement and that they need time and space to process this and to recover. Employees should not feel concerned that an honest conversation about their pregnancy loss will disadvantage them in some way, or that they cannot trust their employer to deal with this information in a sensitive and appropriate manner. I would like to commend the bill's sponsor, Senator Ryan, for your very detailed testimony and ultimately trying to ensure others get the support and compassion that you didn't. I also want to acknowledge our other Senator colleagues who have spoken on their very personal circumstances this afternoon. The time and compassion that went into this bill is appreciated by many, including myself. I've had conversations with members of my own party and others, and I also know work has been carried out by the cross-party Oireachtas Pregnancy Loss Group, whom I look forward to engaging with. As colleagues will know, this is a complex policy area, and one which requires sensitive consideration and assessment in advance of progressing legislation. I have received advice on this bill, and my officials are of the view that there are significant policy challenges to the operation of the bill as it is currently drafted, including the legislative vehicle proposed to carry out the statutory entitlement. Ultimately, an amendment to the Working Time Act is the wrong channel to address this issue. On this basis, I propose that the House passes a motion that the Private Member's Bill, Pregnancy Loss Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2025, be deemed to be read a second time, this day 12 months, so to allow for sufficient time to develop a government legislative proposals in line with the principles of the Private Member's Bill. In proposing this motion, I would like to underline that I fully understand the importance of progressing legislation in this area as a priority, and I am committed to doing this. Over the coming period, officials in my department will engage across government to develop proposals that include measures proposed in this Private Member's Bill. I want to explain my genuine reason for proposing this time amendment. The main legislative vehicle proposed in the bill, the Organisation of Working Time Act, does not suit the purpose it has been used for. This Act was drawn up to implement the European Working Time Directive. Its aim was set out legislation only regarding employees' working time, such as employees' maximum working hours, entitlement to minimum rest periods, and entitlement to minimum period of paid annual leave. It is a narrow bill introduced only to implement a specific European directive. The Act was not designed to set out the terms and conditions around the taking of specific or protected forms of leave and does not align with the aim of these amendments. The Act only references protective or compassionate leave arrangements to clarify that they are not to be included in reference periods used to calculate maximum weekly working hours and nightly working hours. Our legal advisers have been very clear on this. Should legislation be progressed in this space, a standalone piece of legislation may provide a more suitable and coherent legal basis. In terms of the work already carried out, I am informed by the Department of Children, Disability and Equality that they are currently considering the findings of qualitative research study which examined the workplace experiences of people dealing with pregnancy loss. This study was conducted by researchers from University College Cork and the University of Galway. The aim of the project was to examine the workplace experiences of pregnancy loss before 24 weeks gestation to identify relevant supports. The findings of the report have been presented to the Department of Children, Disability and Equality and to members of the Oireachtas, and I understand are now being considered by officials in the Department of Children, Disability and Equality in the context of the development of a new national strategy for women and girls. The strategy is at an advanced stage of development. Building on the work undertaken in a consultation phase, the strategy will take a life cycle approach, calling attention to and addressing the challenges faced by women and girls at different stages of their life. Alongside this work, officials in my department are monitoring the development of a pregnancy loss legislation in other jurisdictions, particularly in the United Kingdom. I note that it has only very recently announced by the UK Government that families who experience pregnancy loss before 24 weeks are set to become entitled to protected bereavement leave under new amendments to the Employment Rights Bill. While the details of this are yet to emerge following public consultation, my officials will continue to engage with their counterparts in the UK as more clarity develops on proposals which will offer valuable insights into the policy and legislative work ahead. There are also broader policy questions to address, including potential implications for the Department of Social Protection in terms of the proposed development of a voluntary register for pregnancy loss to be operated by the General Register's Office. While this falls outside my own remit, I am informed by the General Register's Office stillbirths which occur in a certain framework. Developing a registration process for loss of pregnancy outside these thresholds will need to be carried out by the Department of Social Protection. More generally, the Private Member's Bill requires that pay in respect of employees' pregnancy loss-related leave shall be at a normal weekly rate for 1 day of employment. The employment is proposed at a rate of 5 days paid leave to employee who experiences pregnancy loss and entitlement of 2.5 working days to an employee who is a parent of pregnancy loss. As you will know, maternity and paternity benefits are paid by the Department of Social Protection to those who have a certain number of PRSI contributions under social insurance record and who are in insurable employment up to the first day of their maternity or paternity leave. In conclusion, I believe the intent of this bill is at one with my intent, and the subject matter is deeply important. I have considered the matter closely and engaged with colleagues on it, and I fully recognise the need to introduce leave for those who experience pregnancy loss. It is for these reasons that I have tabled a 12-month timed amendment today. I fully recognise the urgency and significance of progressing proposals in this area. However, this additional time will allow my department and others to thoroughly assess the regulatory and policy implications, engage meaningfully across government to ensure that the development of government legislative proposals are well informed and aligned with the principles as set out in this Private Member's Bill. I want to express my genuine appreciation for all colleagues who have tabled this and previous legislation for continuing a conversation that I believe is very important to have in Shannon and across the Oireachtas. I commit to working across all parties to bring forward proposals to implement leave for pregnancy loss and to do all I can to bring this topic to the forefront in Shannon, Dáil and indeed across wider society. While I know many women and parents prefer to deal with pregnancy loss privately, and this is their absolute choice. Women should not feel like pregnancy loss in the workplace is a taboo subject, and their suffering and loss must be experienced or acknowledged silently or in a discreet manner. I therefore respectfully ask the House to agree to a motion for a timed amendment in order to address this issue together. We are at our strongest when we are united. Garb Magat.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'm now going to call on the proposer, Nicole Ryan, Senator.
Thank you. And just on the offset, I want to thank everybody that contributed to this, who has been supportive of this from the get-go. I really appreciate it. And, you know, there is a lot of work to do, and I'm sure that we can do a whole lot of work together regardless. Minister, in your closing statement, you mentioned 1 in 5 women and a gestation of 24 weeks. That doesn't give me a whole pile of hope, because it's 1 in 4 and the gestation has changed to 23 weeks. You've also talked in your closing statement about a strategy, but a strategy is only as good as the paper that it's printed on if it's not enacted. What we're saying to women today, and what the government is saying to women across all of Ireland right now, is we don't care enough. We really don't care enough. We're just going to throw it down the road, let it try die, and we might come in with something ourselves. There's no sense of urgency, and there are women in this gallery, there are women that are watching online, there are women that I've met, that I've talked to, there are hundreds of women and their partners that are watching this, and they feel that sinking feeling because they know that this cannot progress now. I wasn't asking for the world, we weren't asking for the world here. Legislation takes a whole lot of time. There was nothing stopping anybody from letting this pass to committee where we could have hashed this out. And it is a massive trend here on the opposition. Every single bill that we bring in, every single time we bring in legislation, push it back, push it back. At the very beginning in this House, we stood up and we said, we all want to work collaboratively. Where is the collaboration? Because it's not happening here. And Minister, in the closing statement, you also mentioned that you've been engaging with the Oireachtas cross-party pregnancy group. What group is that? Could I get some point of clarity on that? Is that possible? Is it already an established group within the Oireachtas House?
Yes.
Okay.
I said I will engage with them. I haven't said I have been engaging.
Okay. Which would be great, because a lot of us here are on that group, and that engagement does need to happen. I suppose to the women that took their time to reach out to me, to speak to me, to share their experiences, their heartbreaking stories, their journeys, their words, their wisdom, please understand that we hear and we see you. We care, we understand, and I'll make a promise as I stand this on record that in 12 months' time I will resurrect this bill again. And anybody that knows me will know damn well that I will. So I am really disappointed at the government for putting this amendment in, for delaying this legislation when we can see across the waters if it can be done elsewhere, I don't understand what the delay is to be done here. There are women that are going to have miscarriages today, tomorrow, next week, and every single day across Ireland for the next 12 months while this bill is delayed. They're going to suffer the loss, they're going to suffer the wait, they're going to suffer the silence, and I just really think that that is the most tragic and saddest thing. But as a group, as a cross-party Oireachtas group on pregnancy loss, we will continue to do what we can to raise those voices, even if the government doesn't want to do it right now. So I thank you all, Senators, for contributing in this. I really appreciate your support. We all know how important this is, and irregardless, we'll still keep ploughing on, and we'll make sure that women of Ireland are heard, irregardless of if the government cares or not.
Let's dive into the discussions shaping the nation.